Dobry utro, tovaryshi. And we'll start off with a shot of Yuzhnaya Stolitsa vodka. Get ourselves in the mood. Nazadovia, without the Agurtsi chaser. Good stuff. And Bolshaya had a show. Well, as my Tubanero Maoist Rebel News reported, the Russian Orthodox Church has decided to launch an investigation of Lenin, just in time for Orthodox Easter, no doubt, to judge if his extremist views are acceptable in Russian society and if their propagation and legacy of Red Terror might be suppressed along with Nazi ideas. This is richly ironic, for several reasons. First, certain extremist ideas are far from repressed in Russia and are considered even quite respectable as opposed to Soviet times. Xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism have risen to German levels since the demise of the USSR, and this church announcement is merely one more reflection thereof. As MRN says, this is doubtless a political trick by Vladimir Putin to demonize his largest opposition party, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. But the most iconic thing here is that the Russian Orthodox Church has long been associated with its own color-coded white terror and black-hundred violence. The Russian Orthodox Church also has a legacy of extremist hate writings which still bear influence today in Russian society and permeated faithful from patriarch to peasant. I have here a copy of the Russian Orthodox Church's only known contribution to world literature, namely the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, penned by that Holy Mother Russian father, Sergei Nilis. Actually, it was plagiarized from a French novel by the Tsar's Okhrana, with the good little Pravoslav Pope, the ghostwriter thereof. It formed the last chapter of his oh-so-very Pravoslav treatise, The Great and the Small, the coming of the Antichrist and the rule of Satan on earth. As such, it was used to whip up pogroms against Jews, liberals, Marxists, etc., all throughout the empire, the kind of folk President Putin's entourage still finds so distasteful. This was the field manual for the Union of the Russian People, aka the Black Hundreds, in pogroms from Kishinev in Russian Bessarabia, now Moldova, to Kiev, Odessa, Warsaw, and even against Armenians in Baku. The accredited author had these fine church credentials, which I share with you. Here's our Father Nilis. And as we read here, Professor Nilis was a priest in the Orthodox Church in Russia. He published the first Russian language edition of this work in 1905. In his introduction, he says that a manuscript had been handed to him about 4 years before by a friend, who vouched that it was a true translation of an original document stolen by a woman from one of the most influential and highly initiated leaders of Freemasonry, at the end of a meeting of the initiated in France, that nest of Jewish Masonic conspiracy. Nilis adds that the protocols are not exactly minutes of meetings, but a report, with a part apparently missing, made by some powerful person. Nilis admits the impossibility of producing written or oral proof of the authenticity of this document, and says that we must be satisfied with the circumstantial evidence which abounds. In January 1917, Nilis had prepared a second edition, but before it could be put on the market, the Revolution of March 1917 had taken place, and Kerensky ordered the whole edition to be destroyed. Later, Nilis was arrested by the Bolshevik Cheka, imprisoned and tortured. He was exiled and died in Vladimir on 13th January 1929. His book was accepted as gospel by Tsar Nicholas Romanov, who had to back off when it was revealed to be a forgery. Yet even then, our Holy Orthodox Father Nilis, who, when confronted with this, replied, "Did not the ass, that is, the donkey, of Balaam utter prophecy? Cannot God transform the bones of a dog into sacred miracles? If he can do these things, he can also make the announcement of truth come from the mouth of a liar." The disclaimer alluded to in the introduction. Well, this fine expression of faith was put to test in 1911 in Kiev, when a schoolboy's body was found in a cave outside the city with the alleged stab wounds of a Jewish ritual murder, to allegedly obtain the blood of a Christian child to roll into matzos for Passover. This is the ancient and traditional blood libel found throughout Christendom, but lingering longest in Byzantine lands. As the boy's funeral was progressing, a leaflet was distributed among the mourners reading, "Orthodox Christians, the Zhids have tortured this boy to death. If your children are dear to you, beat up the Zhids." Beat them until there is not a single Žid left in Russia. Have pity on your children. Avenge the unhappy murder. It is time. It is time. So the Tsar's gendarmes found a convenient goat escape. Mandel Bielas, a Jewish carpenter living in Kiev illegally, that is, outside the Jewish Pale of Settlement, without his green card. What ensued was the most notorious, scrofulous, squalid trial in Russian history, outdoing even Stalin's show court a quarter century later. With liberal Europe and America watching, and the Tsar badly in need of foreign capital, like President Putin a century later, the Russian Ministry of Justice let Bielas personally go free, but still clung to the theory the boy had been killed by ritual murder. The trial played no small role in discrediting the Tsar's regime and still haunts the Church's canonization of Saint Nikolai. The execution of the royal family is still sticking in the Church's craw a century later, but that did have a certain rationale. As head of the Russian state, he was legally responsible for all acts in his realm. Of course, he would have told you that as Tsar he stood above all law, but it was on this very point that the revolution was made, and his executioners were composed in good part of Siberian miners who had survived an official state gunning down of their own in the Goldfield Strike of 1912. As for the royal family, well, that also was tragic, but again, what compassion did the Tsar have for the widows and orphans he left behind? When the British ambassador talked to him about regaining the confidence of his people, the Tsar's response was, "They must regain my confidence." Talk about digging your own grave. And my own grandfather was convinced that it was the Tsar who was the Antichrist ruling a kingdom of hell on earth. One can see why. So, nothing extremist here, I suppose. Well, this English translation of the Protocols was made by Victor E. Marsden of the London Morning Post, who brought it out of Russia and gave it a wide circulation among its upper-class conservative British readers. The paper made it part of its right-wing anti-Semitic series on the cause of world unrest. Henry Ford in the USA swore by it. But most importantly of all, it was brought into Germany by a German Balt refugee from Russian Estonia named Alfred Rosenberg, who showed it to Hitler. All through the Nazi blitzkrieg to power, Herr Hitler constantly referred to it as his chief weapon for fighting the cabal of Jews, Freemasons, Illuminati, and Marxists who were really out to rule the world. So it's really laughable that the Russian Orthodox Church would want to condemn Nazism and link it to Bolshevism when, as far as I know, said church has never condemned the Protocols of Zion nor counseled its communicants to avoid it. When this story appeared on the Russia Today news site, I found these kinds of comments. Unfortunately, there are a lot of Russian Jews, and they too control Russia and its history. Only the Russian people can stop them from destroying their culture and tradition. The first Holocaust was committed by Jews against the Christian people of Russia. He, Lenin, was responsible for the death of 30 million Russians, while his Jewish people were working for him and living their rich life. One thing is abundantly clear from all this. Lenin, the Bolsheviks, and the Jewish Zionist Cheka, the notorious cabal, and the commies will have to assert for the unbelievable genocidal crimes that they committed against the Russian people and the Russian Orthodox Church. The Church must not relent. They must press on until they achieve this goal. Unfortunately, I'm not cherry-picking here. The commentaries were loaded with this kind of response, showing that the Russian Orthodox Church yet upholds its onion-domed traditions and uncircumcised glory. And during the years of the Russian Revolution and Civil War, the Russian Orthodox Church protected itself from godless atheist Bolshevism, allegedly the rule of Satan on earth, by lending its services to the White Army. The secular right needed a whitewash to get all those Western arms of spiritual warfare for its side, so it conveniently changed its color to the Russian Orthodox color of death. Russian Orthodox priests accompanied white Russian armies, while Orthodox priests of the Ukrainian Church rode along with the nationalist army of Semyon Petliura. As far as the Zhidani in places like Fastov, Kiev, or Poltava were concerned, it didn't matter whose colors flew over the town. The result was the same for them, with the scent of their ashes rising like incense under the watchful eye of patriotic priests. The worst Jewish Holocaust of the 20th century, before World War II, was in nationalist Ukraine. Isaac Babel, the early Bolshevik writer who fought in the Civil War in the Ukraine and the author of Red Cavalry, based on his experiences and published in 1920, quotes a Ukrainian Orthodox peasant who says, "The Žid is blamed by everyone, by our people and yours. Very few of them will be left after the war. How many Žids are there in the world?" 10 million, answers the narrator. "Only 200,000 will be left," cries the peasant. Vague with his figures, but his prophecy precise in spirit. Well, even so, Azov, you're just strawmanning here. You can't blame the whole Russian Orthodox Church for the acts of bloody extremists. Well, that's exactly what the Church itself is doing, so I think it eminently fair to hoist it by its own beard. But to be fair, let me quote Konstantin Petrovich Pobenovtsev. chief advisor to at least 3 czars for 25 years from the 1880s into the 20th century, who was procurator of the Russian Orthodox Church's Holy Synod, and the man who excommunicated Count Lev Tolstoy for his anti-Orthodox writings. In his memoir, Reflections of a Russian Statesman, he wrote at length on his philosophy, that of a conservative churchman, on the follies of temporal and secular human life. His criticisms have even a certain one-sided merit, as far as they go, a sort of Russian Orthodox antinatalist. Well, in this memoir, he wrote, and I'll quote, "From its dawn to the present day, our church has been the church of the people, inspired by love, and all-embracing without distinction of class. The faith has sustained our peoples in the day of privation and calamity, and one thing they can sustain, strengthen, and regenerate them, only one thing, and that is faith, the faith of the church alone. Our people is reproached with ignorance in its religion. Its faith, we are told, is defiled by superstition. It suffers from corrupt and wicked practices. Its clergy is rude, inactive, ignorant, and depressed, without influence on its flocks. In this reproach is much truth, but these evils are in no way essential, but temporary and adventitious. They spring from many circumstances, from political and economic conditions, with the disappearance of which they also will appear. What then is essential? The love of the people for his church, the conception of the church as a common possession, a congregation common in all things, the total absence of social distinctions, the communion of the people with the ministers of the church, sprung from the people and differing neither in manner of life, in virtues, nor in failings, who stand with their flocks. This is a soil which would bring forth rich fruits with good cultivation, with less concern for the amelioration of life and the bettering of the soul, with less desire that the number of churches exceed not the needs of the people, that those needs shall not remain unsatisfied." Well, this is no doubt the self-image still entertained by the modern Russian Orthodox Church and its place in Russian history, giving it the bald-faced gall to attempt to judge the extremism of others. Only 10 years after Pogrom death, his Holy Orthodox world was swept away in a violent class war waged for the most part not by Jews, but by workers and peasants raised in the Russian Orthodox faith, who'd seen their icons shot out of their hands by the Tsar's troops on Bloody Sunday in 1905, who had then been marched off to war to die patriotically by the millions at the order of his ministers, who came to repudiate the incense and icons of those who blessed their slaughter. It was those people, these very people, who decided it was the Tsar who was the true Antichrist on earth, or his sixth of it, and who made the revolution that swept the Russian Orthodox Church from its sacristies, who put the Tsar to the wall and Lenin in power. To condemn Lenin is, in truth, to condemn the Russian people themselves, and their search for a better life. If they misplaced their faith, where's the evidence that the alternative had ever done them any better? Uh-oh, might be the FSB this time. Hello? Who? Rasputin? Rah, rah, Rasputin, Russia's greatest love machine, the lover of the Russian queen, as Boney M. used to sing. The man who gave a whole new meaning to the term sexual healing, especially with the Tsar's minor boy child. Okay. You just want to say that extremism in the pursuit of virtue was no vice? And the church knows that very well? Hey, let me hook you up with a good American I think you'll like. Barry Goldwater. Oh, wait. He's a damn Jeed.